Welcome to Mooney Reads. My name is Beck, and today I'm going to be talking about what my reading looked like in 2021 and some goals that I have set for 2022. In this video, I'm not going to be talking about a lot of specific books. I'm going to be making separate videos for favorites and stuff like that, but this is just to talk about the general trend of my reading, and what I might want to see differently for next year. Last year, I put together a nice spreadsheet and had stuff that I could break down. This year, I also made a spreadsheet, but I don't think I've touched it since August or so. So I don't really feel like going in and filling all of that out, so we're just going to go off of Goodreads, Storygraph, and some other stuff that I sort of tallied up. So, in 2021, I read 121 books. Looking at the mood of the book, which Storygraph provides, a lot of what I read was emotional and reflective. That's about a third of what I read was emotional and reflective. And then about half of what I read took up the categories of adventurous, lighthearted, informative, or challenging. I tended to read things that were medium-paced, and a fair chunk that were slow-paced, so I read less fast-paced stuff. And then a little over a third of what I read was nonfiction. Breaking down the genre even further, Goodreads does have genres, but they mix in some stuff that's not exactly genre, and it's not really reliable, even with what it says. Though I will say that that is accurate. The overwhelming amount of what I read was very queer. But looking at the kind of tally that I did, 80 books that I read were fiction, and 41 that I read were nonfiction. Nonfiction includes the majority of the poetry because most poets are writing from their own experience, with the one exception of the YA book that I read that was told in verse. The largest category within fiction that I read was manga. I read 24 volumes of manga, and it was pretty dead even down the middle with fantasy versus contemporary. And this was a little bit surprising just because I think I lump a lot of like the series together in my head, rather than thinking of them individually. But that's pretty cool. I really enjoyed the manga that I read. After that category was actually kids' books. I read 20 children's picture books. And part of this is because where I work, we do have kids' picture books that go on sale, and I like to read them to know how to recommend them. I also have a sister who's 3, so I like knowing what to get her. And kids' books are just fun to read, so I end up reading them sometimes. Then after that was graphic novels, and I read 16 fantasy graphic novels and 7 more contemporary graphic novels, though I will say some of the fantasy was, some of the sci-fi fantasy was like lower sci-fi fantasy. For instance, Girl from the Sea, we have kind of our like regular world, but one of the characters is a Selkie. Then looking at stuff that's written more traditionally, with a couple of exceptions that I'll mention, I read 11 adult novels, 6 YA novels, and 1 middle grade. Within that, one of the adult books that I read was actually a short story collection, and there wasn't really that much of a deviation looking at fantasy versus contemporary. But I also didn't have like that many books that I read. And I had a couple of historical ones, but that category is a little bit tough because one of the historical ones was like the 2000s, which is weird to me to call historical. And then there were 2 that I read that were actually alternative histories, that were westerns. They're shelved in fantasy, but like I know that's not technically right. But pretty even across genres that way. Looking within different genres, like I only read 1 romance novel, but that's what my adult reading looked like. Of the YA books that I read, most of them were contemporary. One was historical, set in the 80s, and then one of them was fantasy. Or sci-fi fantasy, I guess. There were aliens, but there was also magic. It was Iron Widow, and you should read it. And then the only middle grade that I read was fantasy. And within that YA, one of the contemporary novels was written in verse, which is Muted by Tammy Charles, which is very good, and way underhyped. I don't understand how so many people miss that. Looking within the nonfiction that I read, 3 of those were graphic nonfiction, so they were graphic novels, or written as graphic novels or comics, but they were about nonfiction topics. The majority of the nonfiction that I read was adjacent to, like, politics, or maybe in the realm of philosophy, or historical, and oftentimes there is, like, overlap with that. I read 5 memoirs, only 1 self-help book, but I did read a few books on, like, astrology and, like, spiritual type of stuff, which kind of counts as self-help because that's what I use it as. And then 1 book about poetry that was actually a reread. Looking at when I read all of these, I definitely had some pretty clear ups and downs. February, for some reason, was rough. I don't remember that far back. I think that I was anticipating March, which was also kind of rough, because that was like, you know, the pandemonium started in month of the year before, so my brain was not doing too hot. July was an even lower point, which was also a really bad month. And then September was also a low point, which makes sense because school started and I did not have time. And then November, you'll see the book count is up, but the page count is down. November is always really rough. And the reason that the book number was up is because a lot of that was kids' books. I read a lot of kids' books in November. And then my best reading month was December, and that's because I got back into audiobooks, and I got a new pair of headphones, so I can listen a little bit when I'm at work and not having to talk to people. So that's really cool. So far as what I rated the books, I did really well this year. The majority of books that I read, I rated 5 stars. Now, that being said, I don't know how to rate kids' books, and I did give them all star ratings, and it's gonna be hard to have, like, a 2-star kids' book, like, unless it's just really horrendous, and if I thought it was gonna be really horrendous, I wouldn't pick it up. And that goes for, like, all books, though. I think the reason why I had, like, did I even have any? Like, I didn't have any 1 or 2-star reads this year, and that's because I'm just not going to read a book that I think is going to be bad. I mean, I have occasionally hate read before, but I just don't have the time. Like, I read 50 Shades of Grey several years ago, and I think that was more than enough hate reading for me personally. I know that you can accidentally upon someone in 2-star books, but I also, my attention span is so bad that I have a hard time reading longer books that I like. So if I start on a book that is bad, I just don't think that I would finish it. But I also haven't purposefully DNF'd anything this year. I have started a book and stopped because my brain stopped working a lot of times, and I didn't tally all that up. But I have not had any intentional DNFs. But I've had a lot of 5-star books. It would be neat to see which types of books were 5 stars, like if I could look at my stats but without the children's books. But even without that, I did have a lot of really good reads. And even the books that are, like, I have some that are 4.75 stars and 4.5 stars. And a lot of those I was struggling to figure out what exactly I wanted. Some of my favorite books of this year, I think I gave technically less than 5 stars, and that's because I saw the technical things that were an issue with them, but I still fucking loved them. And in general, I've been trying to figure out how exactly to rate books, because with like 5-star kids book is gonna be completely different than a 5-star regular book. So that should be represented. And there were some things like, for instance, I think I gave Demon Slayer 3 or 3.5 stars, and I was really surprised at how much I liked that. I really enjoyed it. It's something I plan on continuing. It was a pleasant surprise. Moonstruck, I also gave 3 stars, but it was actually kind of a letdown. So those are 2 very different 3-star books, and so there's a certain point at which the star system feels kind of pointless. I don't really have answers for how I'm gonna rectify that, if it even needs to be rectified, because I'm a casual reader and not a machine that has to quantify everything, even though sometimes I feel like I need to overly perfect things that I do for no real reason. So maybe I'll come up with a new system, maybe I won't. So overall, it's been a pretty good reading year. Stats are overinflated with kids' books, but that's not bad. I would like my reading to look different next year. I would like to read more regular novels, and I would like to finish more books. I have partly read so many books, and you can see on my December TBR, I just go through some of the books that I am in the middle of. It's not even, like, there's stuff that I set down last year that I haven't picked back up yet. I know that there are a couple of things that I forgot in that video. It's not cute. So I want to finish more books in 2022. So my goal isn't to read as many as possible, it's to get shit done. It's to not have nearly as many half-finished books. Another goal that I have is to read the books that I own, the books on my shelves, also the books in my Kindle. I have a lot of unread physical books and a fair amount of unread ebooks. I don't tend to buy ebooks, partly because I forget they exist, but I have a fair amount of them still, either old ebooks, PDFs, or NetGalley books. My problem with the Kindle is that I forget that the books on there exist, and I still have not found an efficient way to rectify that. And then the problems with the books on my shelves is that I just need to read them. So to rectify that, within each month, I want to aim to work on at least 4 books in a different category, and I'll go through those in a minute, and 1 ebook, and hopefully 1 ARC. So that means that I would need to work on at least 5 books a month, which I think is doable. So far as the categories go, I have broken my physical TBR into 17 different categories, which probably sounds ridiculous. Like I said, I have a fuckload of physical books. This is 3 shelves on one side of me, 5 on the other, and an additional 2 shelves that are slightly smaller than these. That's just my nonfiction. Granted, not all of these are unread, but at least half, charitably half of the books that I own are read. So the categories that I have everything broken up into, I've mostly put the nonfiction into different categories because I have a lot of different topics. And with those, I have Lgbt History, which I actually have broken down into 2 categories because I have one that's HIV and AIDS specifically. Queer Theory and LGBT Studies is a separate list. Race in the United States. My prison TBR. I've got number of political books is another category. Feminist theory, memoir, religion, spirituality, self-help, and other. So I have random history books, I think some on the environment, and a couple other things that I just lumped together. Other categories that I have include poetry, graphic novels, manga, adult books that are not sci-fi, adult sci-fi books, young adult, middle grade, and classics. So the goal is to pick at least 4 of those to read, plus a graphic novel to work on reading. I don't necessarily have to finish 5 books every single month, but I want to at least be working on 5 books from each category. With that, I want to do fewer strict monthly TBRs, I think. At least in the way that I've been doing them, or that they're typically done. I still want to talk about my reading plans for the beginning of each month, but they might look less like a strict book list and more like the topic that I want to tackle, or a couple of books that I'm thinking about reading. So it might look more like a pile of possibilities, but I don't. My problem is that when I do that, I pick 500 books because I want to read all of them. So I'm going to have to feel out how I want to do my TBRs. That's going to be a process. So my TBRs are just going to look a little different. Now, there will be some exceptions. I am going to make solid TBRs for certain events. I'm going to be making a TBR for the Rent Readathon. I'm probably going to be making a TBR for a couple of other things throughout the year. I'll probably try to make one for like the Queer Lit Readathon, and a few other things. But for the most part, I'm going to change how I'm doing my TBRs. With that, I also want to release more of my topical TBRs, which aren't time restricted. It's kind of showing you the books that I have or that I want to read on certain topics. I'll link the playlist somewhere. I've already mentioned a few of them kind of just by talking about the categories that I've talked about, because I've made videos about my prison TBR and Race in the United States TBR and queer theory TBR. And then the other thing, I think to read more nonfiction, or really finish more nonfiction, because I feel like I've been reading a lot of nonfiction, but there are just a lot of the books that I started and didn't finish were nonfiction. There were a fair amount that were fiction too, but like it felt like I was reading a lot more nonfiction than I actually was because I kept not finishing stuff. So I would like to finish more nonfiction books, and I would like to be able to focus on the specific topics that I have planned. At any given moment, I have a planned trajectory of how I want to read my nonfiction, and it changes all the fucking time. So, like, I'm not going to make a video on reading order because it will change immediately after I hit the publish button. But anyways, that's got nothing to do with this. I want to read more nonfiction. I want to finish more nonfiction. I want to finish more books. So I'm not going to really be that focused on the number of books that I read. The number of books that I read have never really been a hard goal. I've been doing this for 2 years. I like that I was able to get over 100 books, but I think that my main focus is going to be on finishing the stuff that I start. I think after that, the main thing that I could talk about regarding my reading, there are some yearly readathons that I'd like to participate in, or year-long readathons. The Buzzwordathon is happening again, and for that readathon, every month, they have put out a different word that you should base your reading on. Like, you pick a book with whatever the word is in the title of the book. This is originally put together by Books and Lala, and it's become kind of a more community project. So, for example, in January, the prompt is to find a book with one of the 5 W's in it, one of the question words: who, what, where, when, why. I don't have a book picked out for it yet. I probably will soon, though. The other year-long readathon that I like the idea of joining is the Read Queer 2 2022, which has a little board with it, a bingo board, and I read a bunch of gay books, so I think it should be fun. I like that some of the prompts are emojis, so that's cute. I can't think of who put it together off the top of my head. I should have written it down. but I'll link them so that you can check that out. And I think that is about all for reading wrap-up-ish for 2021 and my plans for 2022. In the comments, let me know about one of your reading goals for this year. And thank you all so much for watching. Bye.